Welcome back to the Better Than Best Academy. Today's guest is being called the King of Twitter Spaces, hosted over 1,500 plus hours of audio, and he's teaching you how to use your voice to grow your audience and gain influence. His name is Greg Luntz. Now, most people only share their success, Greg. I'm more curious about your greatest failures and lessons learned. So I want to start our conversation today by asking you to tell me about the biggest failure you faced and what lesson you learned from it.
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate anybody that's, taking this game seriously. And podcasting is not easy. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of consistency. So I definitely admire you for that, man. And yeah, I mean, the first thing that pops in my head, so I don't love the word failure as much because I feel like, a lot of people in this space, we look at failure, we reframe it a little bit as kind of like just lessons, as you said, and kind of, just part of the journey. But one of the things that I built was an audio dating app back in 2018, 2019. And, you know, we had some success as far as getting it off the ground, running some dating events. It was just basically like a live speed dating thing where you could only hear people's voices. And then after you talk to them for a certain amount of time, you would see their picture and decide if you wanted to match. And you do that multiple times in a row over the course of an event. So we had these little like 25, 30-minute events we were running in Los Angeles, and people really enjoyed it. But as far as like building it into a company, getting critical mass of users is very difficult. I wasn't really equipped, and turned out that I didn't really envision myself as kind of like a tech CEO and, raising millions of dollars of VC capital and, basically having a company with all these engineers and all this stuff. So for all those reasons, it kind of just dissipated, and it was my baby for like 2 years, but I was able to learn a lot along that journey about partnerships, about, structuring a company, about marketing, and about audio. And that's kind of what's come back around full circle as, Twitter Spaces or X Spaces have become a thing. And that's part of the reason that I've been able to just jump in full force, is because I've already done so much of the thinking around how powerful this is, and also experiencing it, watching like a lot of those users, report back how much fun they were having, and talking with them. So I guess, that's why I say it's not really a failure as much as like it's just part of the journey. And then if it's something you're passionate about, if it's something, the lessons that you learned, they'll come back around. Your skill stacking, your knowledge stacking, and eventually they come and play a big part in what you're doing going forward. So that's where I'm at now.
For sure. And I agree. I feel like failure definitely can be that clickbait term that everyone wants to use. But I think that's great. It's definitely just part of your journey. Now, you mentioned this recent boom of X or Twitter spaces, and you've obviously been hosting podcasts for a while. So I'm curious, what's been the biggest insight that you've gained from hosting podcasts and spaces so far?
Mm. Well, I really think that spaces are kind of like the most overpowered platform on the entire internet. And I don't say that lightly. Like, I think not just within X, but I think the amount of positive feedback that you can get towards yourself, towards whatever you're trying to build in these spaces is incredible. So, like, first of all, if you're just tweeting for a bunch of weeks or months or whatever, it takes a long time for people to kind of pick up on what you're doing, or for you to get good enough at it to really cut through the noise and to stand out on the timeline. It's very difficult to do that. With a space, you can get up and speak for 2 or 3 minutes. And I mean, this is a perfect example. Like, anybody that is not familiar with me that's listening to this right now, it's like you already have a way better feel for my energy, the way that I carry myself, the way that I think, the way that I speak, all these things that really like transmit in just a few minutes of speaking versus having to like read someone's text, over and over again. So there's this power to cut through the noise. You get a lot of followers. Like, if you're saying anything decent, and you just like, there's basically a direct correlation with how much you speak with how many followers you get. And again, like with the tweeting, it's like you could tweet a million times, but it has to be really good. And you have to like somehow find a way to get people to look at these tweets and go viral and stuff. But in a space, if there's people in the audience, you can just speak and you're going to be able to get followers. So with You get the followers, you cut through the noise, you can build authority really fast. So, just by speaking on a certain topic, now, if I were to tweet about a topic versus speaking on a topic, it just comes off with like a different energy. You can hear the confidence, you can hear the knowledge, and then the networking, right? So if I have, and this goes for podcasts as well, obviously, like if you have a platform, you can invite people that maybe have a larger audience than you, or that you might not have been able to connect with otherwise. You can offer something of value and say, hey, I would like to interview you, I'd like to bring you in front of other people, and you can invite them into your space or your podcast. And now all of a sudden you're making connections with people. It puts you in a position where you can now impress them, and you can build a relationship with them because you had that voice platform to invite them into. So there's all these different things, all these other benefits to putting yourself out there and speaking, to get yourself in front of a new audience, in front of large networking, large people in your network, influential people. And yeah, I just see so many benefits to it. And it really, like I said, cuts through the noise. That's kind of the big thing.
For sure, for sure. And I totally agree. I've just recently embarked on spaces and already I'm interested. I'll say it even with some of your tweets and seeing you in some of the spaces that encouraged me to say, okay, I'm going to request to be a speaker because I mean, I've been podcasting since 2018. So I've been in the game for a little bit. But I'm curious, so with this idea of spaces, I love this next question because I did a little bit of digging and I saw you mention some of the people that inspire you and motivate you. If you could be in a space with Eric Thomas, Andrew Huberman, Jordan Peterson, those people that really influence you, what would you want to ask them or discuss with them?
Well, I guess it would depend on which person it was.
Each one.
Okay. I'll go, okay, each one. If I was in a space with Eric Thomas, I would ask him, like, how do you, like, if you're familiar with Eric Thomas, like, this guy just has like the craziest fire, like the craziest fire. And it's like, what's the one thing that you tap into every single time that can just turn you on? Like, is it your kids? Is it I know his wife is a big one, but I would love to hear from him. Like, if you were just not feeling it that day and you had to get in front of a crowd, what is that one thing that can instantly just fire you up? Like, I would love to know that. Jordan Peterson, holy crap. Bro, the thing about me with the questions is like I sit and think for a long time. So you're putting me on the spot here for sure. Jordan Peterson. Oh man. He's such an interesting dude. He's such I would wonder, like, what do you dream about? What keeps you up at night and what do you dream about? Like, because he thinks about the world in so many different angles, from like a social psychologist standpoint, but also from a religious and like Bible and scripture standpoint, in a way that I've never seen really people overlap like that, with the professional and the like theological, I guess. So I just wonder, like, what's going on up there? Like, I just want to dig into, like, how you thinking about things when no one's looking and no one's listening. And then Andrew Huberman, I would probably ask him more about like how he does his preparation for his podcasts, and like what does his team look like and how does he execute that, because he came from relative obscurity to just like overnight sensation, so it feels like, at least from a listener standpoint. And the depth of research that he does in every episode, for just hours sitting. I mean, he does the interviews, but for those solo episodes in particular, like, he's just data for hours. And it's like, how do you do that? How do you find the time to do that? What's your structure like? What's your time management like? And also, I'd probably dig a little more into his teenage years and childhood, because I don't know if you know this, but he's got like full sleeves. He's like he's tattooed all, but he wears that same shirt every time and no one knows. And I want to know a little bit more about his past and like his edgier side, because he comes off so professional and buttoned up. But I want to like peel back the curtain a little bit on him.
For sure, for sure. And yeah, I agree. That's totally great. And I love putting you on the spot because as another person that makes podcasts, yeah, I totally get that putting your effort and time into the research of the guest and the questions. And with that said, and I love that you mentioned you would ask him a little bit more of his childhood. I'm curious to know a little bit more of your story, like a little bit of your origin story. you can share what you would like to share, but yeah, I know it's when you're researching someone that has a ton of guests. A lot of times you're hearing about the guests more than the host. So I'd be curious to give you this opportunity to kind of flip the script and tell a little bit of like why you got into this. Like what who is Greg? I'll say it that way. Who is Greg?
Yeah. Well, I was born in New York in 1986, so I'll be 37 this year. I'm probably one of the older heads on Money X, I guess. I grew up there till I was 13. We moved to Connecticut. My parents still live there. Went to college, Indiana University from '05 to '09. Majored in marketing. It was actually called telecommunications back then, which now is probably just like the wires that run between your houses for telephones. But that's what internet like marketing was almost back then. That's how old I am, I guess. But, then I moved back to New York, worked at a bunch of different marketing companies, did landing page optimization, email advertising, social media marketing, kind of you name it. I was working on it and then moved to LA in 2016 to kind of like go after the entrepreneurial bug a little bit. Wanted to move into the sun, lived there for 5 years, did a bunch of failed a lot, learned a lot, did like Amazon FBA stores, did my dating app I was talking about, tried to start a company with my brother for a little bit, worked on a music app, worked at an esports production company, a whole lot of random stuff. And then moved to Phoenix about 3 years ago. And I've been here, kind of moved here to get away from everything and everybody. I don't know anybody here. Well, now I know a couple people just because the length of time I've been here, but like I've cut out my social life for the most part, and I just focus on work and working out and just getting better because my ultimate goal is to have, an amazing family that I can provide for and that we don't have to worry about things like money and that I can give back to people and create a community. These are all things that are starting to become more clear to me as I've been able to grow an audience on X and see, just little things, man. Like you don't realize how much it impacts me when I hear you say something like you encouraged me to get up on stage and speak, like just that little thing. And I know I'm not the only thing that made you do that, but just the fact that I was a part of that and I'm getting that from a lot of people right now. And it feels so good. And then these people are all connecting with each other in the back end, like because of, say, like the Louder spaces. Louder is my brand. We run these spaces where we encourage people to like hit each other up in the DM and network. And I'm getting a lot of feedback from that people are connecting. So making an impact that way, I feel like I'm starting to hit my stride a little bit on doing my thing. But like I was saying, like I need to isolate myself, I feel like, for a little bit, for a few years here to just go all in on me. And I'll reintegrate into, trying to find the right girl. Like I always say that the girl that I'm going to end up being with is probably looking above me right now. Like she's looking over my head right now at some other guy that's higher up in the hierarchy, and as she should. So it's my job to like get there to attract the woman that I want, to have the family that I want. So that's really where my head's at. And yeah, man, I'm just a kid from the city that, I just really am obsessed with the idea of making money online, living in the sun, having like that all important like time and location freedom. Financial freedom is obvious, but that is really the base layer. Like if you make 500K a year, but you can't leave your town because you have to be at work every day, is it really like, are you really taking advantage of that money and that are you really free? So I'm focused on like digital freedom and not really owning that many things at the moment. Like I just bought my car out, but I can sell that easily. It was only because the lease was up, but I own my laptop and my crypto and my car, and that's pretty much it. So I like this idea of maybe leaving the country at some point. And so those are kind of some of the things, I guess, I have a younger brother. My parents are still together. They're amazing. They just had their 44th anniversary last week. And just trying to build a good life, man. Just trying to build a good life based around freedom.
I love that idea of freedom. I know a lot of people, especially in this space of X and Twitter, are chasing that. And one thing you mentioned, even when you said that when you're taking this time to focus on you and grow in the areas that you want to go in, knowing that the woman you're looking for is probably looking above you at the time. It reminds me of when I was I've been married for 4 years, 5 years now, somewhere in there with 2 kids. And I can remember when I was in that season, singleness, and I just got into a space of just running hard after for me, it's my faith. I'm really big in my faith in God, and my camera likes to shut off on me sometimes. Give me a second. Goodness. There we go. But yeah, so like I'm really big in my faith, and I remember I was talking to a friend of mine. It was a mentor. It might have even been my pastor, but it was this idea of like for me, it was running after God, and if I can put all of my effort in becoming the man that I feel like I need to be, then when I look over to the left or right, I'm gonna see someone running just as fast as I am after this, and that's gonna be the person that you're gonna be like, "Wow, this is the person I could spend the rest of my life with," and that's definitely been the case, and I think that that's great you're in that space because a lot of times we hear the opposite. We hear like, like you really need to surround yourself with people, and you do, and I think it's a both thing. Like, you need to have that idea of, "Okay, it's time to" not necessarily completely isolate yourself from everyone, but put that focus and that commitment and that laser focus effort into that thing, and I think that's really important. And I'm curious, so we touched a little bit about your past self and your present self, and I'm lost again. Hold on, give me a second. I'm going to just go ahead and switch cameras because this is gonna bother me.
No worries, bro.
Not nearly as good quality, but it won't keep cutting out and making me mad. Oh, still working through the kinks of using my phone as webcam, but
Been there, bro.
yeah. But yeah, so we touched a little bit on your past, and we touched a little bit of currently. I'm curious if you could have a conversation with your future self, like 10 years from now, what advice or insight do you think that they would give you about where you're at and where you wanna be?
I think he would say, stick to the fundamentals and stop rushing so much. Like, I think I've been decent at that, but I think it would be encouragement to continue to do that. Like, since I've started building this louder community over the past month and a half, I see very clearly a path to monetization, a number of different channels for that. And I'm getting a little bit like I don't want to get ahead of myself to be like, hey, just launch this, like launch this, launch this. Like last night I was looking at subscriptions on X and I noticed that you can do subscriber only spaces and I'm like, like there's something, like, and it's like, but is it the right time for that? Do I just, because the more you just give and give and give, the more on the back end that you can ask. And yeah, I'm so intent on like building a foundation around this as a business so that I can like be sustainable based on this community. And I don't want to rush that. So I think he would say just put the building blocks in place. Like keep doing what you're doing, bro. Like I'm actually really proud of myself, Red. Like over the last 6 months, I've just really committed to looking at myself and finding out what's sustainable and what I can build. And that's kind of what's led me to this moment where I feel like I'm on the cusp of something really, really cool. So don't lose that. Like just keep executing, keep surrounding yourself with people, keep investing your energy into your community, like pouring into them. Like something I've done that's really been a game changer that I think anybody and everybody should be doing is I look at my likes. Like, so if I put out a tweet and whoever likes my tweet, if they follow me, they get a voice note. So I send them a voice note, basically just expressing gratitude for following me and for being a part of my community. And I make no ask. I just say like, thank you. And the level of response back to me is insane. There's a couple things that's a benefit for. One is they just be like, wow, nobody's doing this. No one's reaching out, let alone like reaching out with a voice note. I use their name in it just so they know, like, hey, I'm like, yo, what's up, Red? Like, hope you're having a great week, man. Just wanted to thank you, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, okay. And then there's the added thing is like when they respond, there's an algorithmic effect to that, which I didn't realize until after the fact. There's an algorithmic effect where if you're talking to someone in DMs, if there's an up and back going on, the algorithm is more likely to show your content on their feed. So there's been a direct correlation between when I started to do this like personalized outreach at scale and the engagement on my tweets has gone up like significantly. So those types of things, like keep doing the unscalable things, like sending a voice note to everyone in your community is not a scalable activity. But if you do it at scale, it pours back in and you just see those results. So that's what I think he would say to me is just keep doing what you're doing, honor the fundamentals, follow the data, and just enjoy the process, man.
I love that. And there's so many good points just that I want to pull from there. Like that idea of you're already recognizing now that it's important to find what's sustainable and what works for you. And that's something I've noticed even with my coaching with helping people that are extremely burnt out or overwhelmed in these great businesses they've built is a lot of times they're trying to fit into the box of other people. Like they see the Alex Hermosis, they see even Steve Jobs, and they see people like that. And not saying that everyone's not able to do great things, but I feel like when we're able to tie it to the tailor-made path that's been designed for us, then we're really able to do it. And I think that's so great that you've grasped the idea of building the firm foundation because a lot of people will miss that. And you see that there's this overnight success of people or this you see the one-hit wonders when it comes to music. And I'm always curious when I see that, what would have happened if they had someone in their life to say, "Hold on, buddy, slow down." Because I'm in the space of I believe that when we slow down, it'll help us speed up. And it's that idea of we become more by doing less. And I'm not saying we're not working hard. Like I'm all for there's anything, I'm definitely a proponent of working hard. But it's this idea of you don't have to do the next shiny thing that you see. Like what if you could just get laser focused in the thing that is your strength? Like for you, it's leaning into this audio, leaning into the speaking space. And I think that's beautiful that you've taken that space. But also, man, you're giving some nuggets, some practical nuggets, like this idea of voice notes to the people that like your content. I love that personal touch, and I'm taking notes. I'm about to start doing that. So there's going to be two of us out there,
Do
maybe
it,
more
man.
doing that. And I think it's so interesting and a fresh way to say, "Hey, I'm taking the time." It's like you said, doing the things that aren't necessarily scalable, because that's what's going to set you apart. Because I don't know about you, but I get sick and tired of cold outreach DM from the 12-year-old that wants to be a copywriter. No offense to him. I appreciate the hustle. Like I understand, having that spirit to want to make something of yourself, but at the same time, how can you do it differently? Like I say that all the time to this guy that I've been helping that's been a little bit kind of like my intern to a degree. And I am always encouraging him like, what can you do to set yourself apart? And I think that doing things like you mentioned, that the voice notes is one of those things. Man, I'm curious to continue to dive into more of you. And there's one question that I like to ask sometimes that I don't think many people get asked, but I feel like if people really knew you, what would they be surprised about you?
Well, I did mention already that like I don't really have a social life at all right now. The good thing about spaces though, there is like a real social element to it. Like you do get like some of that fulfillment of like, oh, I just hung out with all my friends. Like you definitely get that when you run a space for an hour and just talk to people. So that's been cool. What would people be surprised about me? Yeah, it's like I don't really have any hobbies right now. I used to have a lot. I used to love sports. I used to play a lot of video games. I used to go out and drink. I don't do any of that stuff anymore. So I guess I'm just kind of like, I don't want to say I'm not a loner, but I'm like definitely in monk mode. But that probably doesn't even surprise anybody, dude. That's a tough question. Because I one of the things about that I pride myself on, I've told like a lot of deep, vulnerable stories in some of these spaces. Not the louder spaces because those aren't about me, but I've been doing these pop-up spaces, which I think are cool. I'll just go for walks and I'll fire up a space. And then I'm telling stories about like breakups. I'm telling stories about like family stuff. So I don't know if people would be surprised. You know what else is cool? I had this podcast back in like 5 years ago where I was basically doing an audio diary. So every week I would just record like between 5 and 30 minutes of like what happened that week. And then I would edit the shit out of it, like just to make it like super clean, like it just sounded like it was one train of thought. And then I would do like a little artwork and stuff and I would post it and I would post it for nobody. I knew that there was like 3 or 5 people listening. I never promoted, I never had an audience like in general. So I knew there wasn't going to be one for this podcast. But now what I'm doing is I'm playing back some of these clips and these episodes now to my current audience, and it's showing like a real like light on like, oh, like he did put in the work. He was like building this app. He was like, out here trying to figure it out. So when you ask me like what people would be surprised about, I'm like, I'm kind of like showing everyone everything. Like that's something I'm really trying to do. I guess like I'm more like maybe I guess I have like an angry side to me maybe sometimes, or like a judgmental side. But again, like is that surprising? We all kind of judgmental at some degree, but I'll like I struggle with comparison. I look at people ahead of me and I judge myself a lot, or I'll be envious. Like even of like my brother is younger than me and he's absolutely killing it, like financially and like all types of freedom. He's just like destroying. And so I'm like, I get envious of him, but then I settle back in quickly. But yeah, I guess maybe for anyone that like looks at me is like, oh, Greg's got it all figured out or whatever. He's really locked into his niche. He's da da da. It's like, bro, I struggle with all the same, like, so maybe that's surprising to some people that I'm not like as buttoned up maybe or as like polished as I try to come off online. I'm not sure if that's a good answer, but that's kind of what comes to mind.
No, it's great. And first, I think it's important. You said a key thing that your willingness to be vulnerable and share those stories is something that I think is first off, our vulnerability is a gift. And I also feel like our vulnerability is our super strength. And I say that quite a bit on this show because I feel like also as men, we at least in millennials and older, you notice there was this trend of not saying how you really feel because one, you didn't want to look like a wuss. Like that was a whole thing. And that was a whole generation of people that felt that way. But I think it's great that there is this ability now as men that we can embrace both. I say it like this: we can embrace both the tough and tender. Like we're allowed to be men and full of strength, but at the same time, we're able to embrace the tender sides of ourselves. We embrace those emotions and process those emotions because I think it's important to have make that room and create that space for people to hold that space for people to have that because I feel like as human beings in general, we and especially with social media, we wanna, like, put our highlight reels out. When Instagram was the thing, for me, when I was, like, end of high school, college, like, Instagram was it, and when you did, it was over photoshopped. It was the beautiful lives. It wasn't the for instance, the families with kids, you would see the perfect photo, but instead, like, what would happen how many photos did it take to get you to that? And I love seeing, like, the ridiculous real life things and normally when my kids are here, you probably would have saw my son barge in and say something by now. And I think there's a beauty in just bringing people along in your journey and letting them in. It just brings another level of humanity to it. And I appreciate you for sharing that. And you mentioned that you still deal with comparison. And I feel like honestly we all do. And it's amazing how a lot of times you see the success and you see, like you said, the polished, perfect, not perfect, but appearing perfect things. But at the end of the day, we still have those moments where we're like, we're not where we want to be. And I think that that's really interesting to hear. And I know someone at home listening is probably going to be like, wow, he is like us. We are very similar. But I'm curious as we kinda shift and we've been in the conversation for a little bit, I'm curious to ask you if you have any questions for me.
Yeah, what's your goal with the podcast? How like if it was a perfect scenario, how would this all play out for you?
Perfect scenario. So perfect scenario, I'm really inspired by Ed Milet, Lewis Howes. I don't know if you've heard of those guys, you might have.
Sure. Of course.
Kinda like the top guys, even the Diary of a CEO, that guy as well. And
Stephen Bartlett.
yeah, Stephen Bartlett, that's right. I'm inspired by their podcast and what they're doing, these conversations that they're having, especially like with Ed Milet, because he's big in his faith as well. And I resonate with that. And just seeing how he navigates both is interesting. I would say getting to that level, that would be amazing. But also at the same time, like I started coaching about 2 years ago now. And part of the reason I even continued the podcast and had guests was because I wanted to obviously give the opportunity to share that I do offer one-on-one coaching and eventually group coaching and things like that. Obviously, you've got all the plans, and I could go there with it. But yeah, in a perfect world, I see my podcast reaching millions. And, like, it sounds crazy, but I see my podcast reaching millions, but not just for the fact of to get my name out there, but to truly impact lives and to show people that it's possible to go after their purpose and calling. And it's the same with my coaching when I'm doing it one-on-one with someone. I want the same. It's impact for me. Like you mentioned freedom, like one of your driving forces is freedom. For me, it's leaving that legacy, leaving that impact.
Yeah, I think that the podcast is the best way to do that. Like we said in the beginning, like it's definitely the hardest. Like
Yeah, for
maybe
sure.
anybody there is a decently low barrier to entry of anyone just like firing up and recording a
Right.
conversation, but in terms of like consistency of production, the marketing side, like the lack of like virality to podcasts is really tough. You know, you listen to guys like Chris Williamson from the Modern Wisdom podcast, and he's like nobody, and he just crossed 1 million followers on YouTube. He's absolutely dominating. He's like nobody gave about my show for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like even Joe Rogan, and he had a huge like history. Now I guess it's different because like it was before podcasting was big, but like it takes years for these things to really start to catch some traction. And what's important, I think, with the pod, because I have my own as well, is like that's not my whole thing. That's like an outlet for networking, for brand awareness and things like that. But if it's like I'm a podcaster and it's like that's the only thing you have going on, that's going to be really difficult for you to get anywhere with. So it's like, and that's the other thing. Like when I see podcasters, a lot of times I'll be like, okay, so who is this guy? Like I'm not satisfied with the fact that he has a podcast. Anyone can have a podcast, but oh, it's Lex Friedman. Oh, he's an AI researcher and he has a podcast. Oh, like Joe Rogan is a USC commentator and a comedian and et cetera, and he has a podcast or whatever it is. Ed Milet, he's like this performance coach and family man, and he's got a podcast. So what businesses do you have outside that you can then bring in that knowledge, that experience, and that insight into your show that actually makes it a great show? That's why I didn't start the Greg Lunt podcast.
Yeah.
I started more of an educational podcast with Louder. Is like I'm bringing in influencers and people that have built online communities and help. Basically, I formulate my questions to help people that are in the beginning stages or in the mid stages, anyone that's behind these like very successful influential people online. And I ask questions for them because it's not about me. It can't be about me until I've actually succeeded and done something really great. Then people will come to my show and maybe be like, oh, I can't wait to see how like Greg interviews this person or that conversation with them. But who cares about me right now? Nobody. So I need to bring value through the actual questions of the show. That's kind of how I view it. And but ultimately, all that to say, when you do break through in the podcast, Red, which you will, is like that's going to be the most impactful way to connect with people because you're in their ear. They're spending more time with you on a weekly basis than they may even be with their wife or their kids or their mom. And all of a sudden, you become their best friend and you don't even know them. And you have thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people that really resonate with you and your ideas. And you also mentioned like when you hear the person hosting, you only really hear about the guests and stuff. But if they listen to enough of you, and you know this from listening to Ed Milet and Lewis Howes, you start to learn things about them as well over time, and you become really connected to them and their story. So as a podcaster, we have the opportunity to do that if you can stay consistent, push through like all of the like no views for however many years,
It's like
and be building on the side, and then all of it will come together at that perfect moment. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of faith.
yeah, and I agree completely. It definitely hasn't been the only thing. And like I said, I started in 2018 and I've posted at least one podcast a week
Wow.
since then. I mean, I did take a little bit of time off, but I was still posting like previous shows and tweaking some of them and then went on to YouTube and been doing that for a bit. And yeah, it's like you said, and that's why I structure it in a way where I like to have my guests ask these questions because then they do get a piece of me. For instance, if they've listened for any time, they know that I had a 10-year rap career, that I've been playing drums for almost 9 years now for my church, and I've been coaching for a few years now. I was a video editor for a fairly fairly successful, like, she was kinda like a life coach, I guess you could say, like, public speaker, minister, life coach thing, and she actually had Ed Mylett at one of her business conferences. That was really cool.
Mm.
It was right after I left. I was like, "Man," as soon as I left and started my own thing, then you had Ed Mylett. I was like, "Dang it." But yeah, like, I helped her grow her YouTube channel to 150K subscribers. And again, I'm not saying that at all by any means to flex or anything. I just say it like I've seen it possible, and I've also seen it possible where the podcast is just a arm of the whole thing, and I think that's super interesting. So I'm curious. I don't have too many more questions for you. This next one I always like to ask because it's one that I feel like is interesting, not only for the listeners to hear a different perspective, but also for my guest. And I'm curious, Greg. So say you're at the end of your life and you've had this great life. You've done all the things and then some that you want to. And you're in your final days, you're surrounded by all your loved ones. You're on your metaphorical deathbed, you could say. What do you want to be remembered for?
I wanna be remembered for having a good heart and for putting like, giving people a platform or an opportunity. Like, I wanna be able to lift other people up and allow them to thrive. I wanna inspire them, I wanna encourage them, and I wanna be able to provide and give back to them. So just, like, yeah, just being the ultimate provider for people that are in my first, second, third degrees, people that I can touch, and just knowing that and it's cool because I'm starting to see that a little bit, right, on the lowest scale where it's like I mentioned before, like when you said like, "Oh, you encouraged me to get on stage." Like, that's like level point 5 of where I'm trying to get, where it's like, okay, people are listening to me, that's a start, and then it's like people are potentially taking action because of me, okay, how much more can I give them? Like, that's why I wanna build this louder community and, like, have it off platform, like, get it off of X and somewhere where you all can mingle and actually, like, we have this thing as part of our spaces called Amplify at the end, where, it's a segment where we invite somebody up from the stage, from the audience, because we don't really have Q&A in a lot of these, but what we'll do is we'll have somebody come up, and then they'll ask a question, and as they're asking a question, I'll go into their feed, I'll pick a tweet, and I'll pin it to the top of our space. And everybody in the space then I'll encourage to like, retweet, comment, bookmark, everything. And we blow that tweet up with like massive engagement and we amplify that person. And I think we can do that on a bigger scale where if we had like, a Discord or a circle or whatever like platform we go to, and we bring people in there and now we can have like multiple of those a day where the whole community, like we select certain tweets and everyone just blows them up all the time. Or it's like, hey, I want to start a space. And then like 40 people just rush your space like right at the beginning. And it's like this mass amplification of each other and support of each other. And then just continually growing that and growing that where it's like this community is just incredibly connected and vibrant and supportive and being able to like foster that and create systems that allow for that and it's easy for people and it just that those are the things that I'm getting really excited about is like building communities that allow for that impact, that influence, and ultimately feeling like that providing people opportunity.
I love it. That's so cool, and it's a great idea. And I think it's you're already doing that. I feel like just a little bit that I've seen, and I believe that people need their flowers, their roses when they're still alive. And I want to take that moment to encourage you is to keep doing it because people are seeing it, people are noticing it. Most importantly, people are being impacted by it. And it's that idea of when we realize that our lives are bigger than our own and
Mm.
we are tied into something that's so much more greater. I think it's a beautiful thing. Diary of a CEO, he likes to ask the previous guest to leave a question for them. I've taken it a step further and I'll pull it up and let you hear it. And then I would love to have you answer. So let's see. We have Anna, she's a burnout coach as well. I recently did a podcast with her, and here's the question that she had for you.
Let's lean into joyfulness, I guess. So my question would be, how can you be joyful even on days when everything sucks?
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of easy. That answer is gratitude, right? That's like an incredible key to unlocking. You can't be upset and sad when you're grateful. So, what are the things in your life that you're grateful for? And there's got to be a million. And if you can't come up with like 5 or 10 off the top of your head, that's part of the challenge of the reframe that I would put onto anybody else listening to this. Is like I can easily be grateful. Like just look at where I was a few years ago compared to now. It's like, dude, like I'm so grateful for all these opportunities. I'm grateful that I have an apartment that I can pay for. I'm grateful that all my immediate family is alive and healthy. I'm grateful for the sun. I can just walk outside and get sun and go for a walk and just be present and enjoy and not have anyone breathing down my neck. I'm grateful for my community and for the opportunities that social media has given me. I'm grateful for so many things, so many people, so yeah, there's gonna be plenty of days where, like, it's terrible and, you just have work that you don't wanna do and you're just under the gun and whatever it may be, maybe you lose a client or, like, there's a million things. And then when it gets really intense, like, maybe you're dealing with, like, a passing of somebody or all those but can you be grateful for the time you spent with them? Can you be grateful for the lessons you learned that will live forever? Can you be grateful for that you can close your eyes and breathe and connect with them right then and there? Like, how can you find gratitude in every single thing that's going on? Somebody cuts you off and they flick you off on the way by. It's like, I'm pretty grateful that I'm in a car right now that I even had that opportunity, that I'm on my way to get where I need to go to do something cool, right? It's like, it's not, it's easy to fall into the trap of judging and being upset and letting that emotion take over you and those negative thought patterns, but gratitude dissolves all of that. And so I have it tattooed right on my wrist to be grateful, and it's kind of the unlock for me for any time that I'm not feeling my best.
I love that, and I agree 100%. Be grateful and say so. I always say,
Mm.
because a lot of times we might be grateful, but we don't speak it. And I think that life and death, there's power in the tongue. And if we can verbally express our gratitude, that's going to get us out of whatever sucky state or negative state that we could be in. If you could condense your entire message or insight into a single metaphor, symbol, or image, what would it be and why?
A metaphor. I mean, I could just put it into like a sentence,
That
basically,
work.
where it would just be speak more,
Mm.
use your voice.
Say
Like
it loud.
that say it louder, bro. That's it. It's like that if you have the opportunity to speak, we touched on this in the beginning of the show. It's just you cut through the noise, you get followers, you build your authority, you increase your network, you get to actually also learn what you think. And I'm sure you know this by doing the podcast, is like as you speak and especially when you're like you have an audience, you feel like there's a little more like pressure almost in a good way
Yeah.
to refine your thoughts in real time and actually along the way you figure out things that you think. You're like it's like writing and speaking are very similar in that way. It's like you have all these things flowing around in your head, but when you put them out and you turn them into a communication vehicle to help and to speak to others and to teach them or to just share with them, you actually refine your thoughts and figure out what you actually think along the way by doing that. So there's just infinite benefits right now. We have opportunities like spaces and like podcasts, these arenas where you can go and you can speak and you can get 5 different things that are working positively in your favor by just what? Getting over like a little bit of stage fright. These spaces are incredibly supportive. I've never seen anyone go on a space and get ridiculed or hated on, and quite the opposite. Actually, people go out of their way to support. So it's a safe space, all the time. So go ahead and challenge yourself and just say what you think, and you'll be surprised at what happens.
Come on. You heard it, people. Say it louder. And I'll add to that. I feel like a lot of times people chase confidence and needing to be more confident to speak. But I like to challenge that thinking and say you just need courage. You literally just need 1 ounce of courage to raise your hand in a space or click the like shaking. You just got to go click the button that says become a speaker and do it, because you're not going to learn until you do, I feel like sometimes. And it's like you said, that's such a valuable insight in itself, that the more you speak, the more you will understand the way you think and your belief systems, and what really makes you tick in a way that's going to help you help others. And with that said, you answered that question. So I'd love for you to now leave a question for my next guest.
Yeah. My question is,
Was that not a fire conversation? I know you're going to leave better than before you tuned into it. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to hit the subscribe button on screen. And if you want to continue watching more inspiring and encouraging content, you can click here. If you really got something out of this, or if you have any feedback so that we can make this show even better, don't hesitate, drop a comment below. As always, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.